Hello, hello. I want to talk to you today about that song. You know that song, the song of the summer? Where my boosters at? Spin that inch, spin that inch. I love that song. It's a bop. It's a bop. And I wanted to take this time to talk about that song within the context of a Black feminist or Black feminist geography perspective. Um, Hello, let me introduce myself first. I am Dr. Keisha Dupree. I'm a Black Studies professor, been so for decades in my age and myself. Let's say I started at 15. Yeah. And I've been doing this for 2 decades. I'm also creator, founder, executive of the Sojourners Academy, where I take the principles that I use in my classroom and bring them out of the classroom and into public life, creating workshops for adult learners to talk about Black studies in the diaspora, the African diaspora, as well as sponsor family study abroad tours, family study abroad experiences for families looking to have a more intentional and community-centered and Black-centered form of travel. So that's what I do in the daytime. And I also like to bring this to an even bigger group, and that is you out there in the YouTube world. So if you're interested in some of these things, I would love for you to subscribe to this channel and to share some of these ideas because I like to talk about them. That was awkward. Anyway, I was filling up space. Let's rewind. I do these things in one take, so what happens, happens. It would take me longer to get them out. So back to spin that ish, spin that ish. It's a bop, as I said before, and my sons had it on because they love that music. And when I started, moving to it, they were like, mother. I mean, that was their attitude. I was like, hey, it's good. It's interesting. And so what I want to talk about in this context, again, with a Black feminist and Black feminist geography perspective, are two things related to that song. And that is to critique the critics. So a Black feminist critique of the people who are up in arms about this song, the summer song by Young Miami. Talk a little bit about that. And then I want to step back from that particular moment, but to direct folks to the real scammers and boosters. The real scammers and boosters who I think folks should save that pearl clutching energy and look at the current administration. And that's where we find the boosters and the scammers. And you know whose money they're spending? Ours. So let's go through this. I'm going to spend a few minutes. My husband said that my videos were too long, and he's probably right. But, I publish them so infrequently that, I'm going to give you all I got and try to stay at, 30 minutes or so. So let's jump into this. So critiquing the critics. There are two things that I think explain, there are two things I think that explain why there was a countercultural backlash, interracial countercultural backlash, I know it's a lot of words, to the song. And then, so to the song. And those two terms that I want us to think about is misogynnoir, which I've covered before. I'll try to find a way to put it in the video, but when I have to start editing, it takes longer to get out. So if I don't put it in the video, if you don't see it anywhere around here, wherever it goes, it will be in the description to link you to my episode about misogynnoir. I think it's really good. So because I talked about it in a prior episode, I will just say that I think that the criticism is yet another manifestation or practice of misogynnoir. Young Miami, of the City Girls, you're like, how you know about them? Very little, very surface. But out of all the songs to clutch your pearls at, and out of all the artists to be all uphead about, Young Miami would be the least. And we'll talk a little bit later about this particular moment when I talk about in music and hip hop, especially. So the other term in just misogynnoir, like why there is something about a Black woman doing it and saying it that gets more heat than the majority male hip hop artists or cultural producers that speak of similar things, of speaking of the underground economy, as we like to say, and speaks of violence and more horrific things. Like, why is that venom staved for Young Miami in the song? And I think that the key of it is Mr. Marr. And so, you know, if I were delivering this in my class, there would inevitably be a student who's like, well, Dr. Dupree, well, professor, you know, people give flack to all kinds of artists. And that is true. But it's interesting that this one song by this one artist gets that level of heat. And I would say it's Mr. Noir. And then they would say, or another one would say, well, there are a lot of women, Black women who are critiquing this song. And I would say that there's another term, there's a subterm. I think I might do a whole video on this, but we call them as scholars, women who carry the water. Sorry, I got a message from my recording streaming device. Women who carry water for patriarchy. And when I use that term in my class, they were like, "Oh, you mean pick-me's?" I was like, if that's the term that is more accessible for folks, then please. I don't go around saying pick-me's, but if you get it better than me saying that there are women who carry water for patriarchy, ooh, that might be a good future episode. Let me know in the comments if you want to hear that. That could, that could be a good one. But yes, so women can critique women as a form of misogynnoir because there are women who are support patriarchy. It's not really a conundrum. Like there are Black police officers, like there are, I mean, like just because, you know, the whole term like all skinfolk and kinfolk, the same can be said about that person can inhabit a marginalized status, in this case in patriarchy, gender, and they can also uphold patriarchal values. So that's how I'll explain that. And in that case, it's misogynnoir. So a person can also be African American and upholds the values that you wouldn't call them a white supremacist, and they certainly would be consider themselves not, but they carry the values and the ideologies of white supremacy. So go look at my former video on misogynnoir, and as I break it all down. But I want to introduce another term, highlight another one today, because you have Mr. Noir over there. And I want to highlight the term of politics of respectability, or respectability politics. You may have, I mean, it's pretty much become a very accessible word, but I want to, you know, dig into the definition and the applications for this. So, you know, I have my little notes up here. Okay, I've done that. So politics of respectability, or respectability politics. That term is attributed to a historian, Elizabeth Brooks Higginbotham. And she wrote a book. She's a historian, and she wrote a book where it first appears, as ideas of the politics of respectability. It's her 1993 book called Righteous Discontent. So this is where you first see this particular term, is in 1993, Higginbotham's 1993 Righteous Discontent. And the subtitle of that is The Women's Movement in the Black Baptist Church from 1890 to 1920. And I think that's important to keep in mind, particularly as I talk about the pros and cons, I guess to say, of this idea. So again, this was in her book, a classic book. And she's talking about the politics of respectability in terms of Black women, particularly Black church women, and how they govern or try to govern the community. Sorry, I have to cough. That's terrible. Let me mute myself for a minute. There we go. I'm back from a cough. So from that, if you haven't have a definition, I feel like we throw words around without the definition. So I'm gonna give you one to work with here. In terms of the way that Higginbotham wrote about this, she was specifically talking about Black women, but we can extend politics of respectability beyond Black women. It could be Black people, but it could also be other marginalized groups. So it is a marginalized community, and there are certain people in that community who practice this respectability politics. So in the case of her book, she was talking about Black church women. And the definition, loosely based on her book, is Black women, church women, who focused their efforts on behavioral conformity, morality, measurements of morality, and personal presentation to advocate for equal rights. Let me say that again. So in the context of Higginbotham's book, she was looking at the practice of Black church women who focused their efforts, who saw their position in society in advocating for equal rights for the Black community. They saw that their tool for advocating for that was to police people who fell out of line, police Black people in the community who fell out of line in terms of what was expected of them in the way they spoke, the way they dressed, who they associated with, their comportment. And as I say this, it reminds me of a debutante ball, if you've ever been to one. And I'm not critiquing that. That's, if somebody asked me to when I was 16, I would have been like, yes. I probably couldn't have done it because I was broke. My family was broke. But no shade on that right now. I can say more about the Black middle class. But in terms of the politics of respectability, these particular women, but it's not always women, but these particular, we'll call them elites in the community, saw it as their responsibility to police the behavior and the style of what they saw as inferior Black people, in order, that was their way. Let's fix them. Let's fix their problems. Let's clean them up, get them some clothes or whatever. And that is our tool for establishing equal rights in this racist world. That brings me to, and if you can't tell where I'm going, that brings me to how this is a strategy is problematic. I hope you see where I'm going, but if you don't, I'm gonna get there. So let's talk about why this arises, and I'm sure that Higginbotham talks about it too, but again, I want to refresh so we can have a conversation. without reading her book, but I will put the book in my description as well if you want to check it out. So everybody critiques respectability politics, and right now as I'm recording this, I realize that there is a conversation happening in the Black threads verse or whatever about Tuskegee and their protocol for dress for students. I don't know enough about that. I can't talk about that. Maybe next week or so, but what I'm really want to focus on is this. It sounds like, from a person who has peripherally read it, it does sound like a level of respectability politics, but that's just my really soft opinion before I look into it. But let's talk about this part. So Higginbotham is writing this, and she's talking about a particular period, and that's why it's important to understand this, because respectability politics is considered awful now by some. But within the context of what these women were doing and what America was like, it makes sense. It doesn't bear out across time as a strategy for civil rights, human rights, but it made sense at the time. So remember, her book is about the time between 1890 and 1920. So 1890 is roughly the era of post-Reconstruction, right? When after the war, there's a Reconstruction period, a way of establishing or extending citizenship to African Americans. And then we see the country pull away from all that advancement and to go into this post-Reconstruction period, this 1890 to 1920, which is horrific. In 1890, 1920, what we saw as promising Black political leadership in state houses was wiped out. What we saw was the establishment of the Ku Klux Klan is born during this period. And so the pendulum swings back to kind of the most awful forms of white supremacy. And one of those things was minstrelsy. And minstrelsy was the theater performance of Black people. I'm sorry, the performance of white people. Oh, Lord. White people who dressed, presented in blackface, and they wrote songs and had plays. You may have heard of Al Jolson. They wrote songs and had plays that brought out the most virulent racist stereotypes of Black people, right? So popular music has it. There's a song called Chicken Charlie. And so, you know, describing African Americans as lazy and immoral, prone to steal, all of these, the pendulum swings in terms of the acceptance of African Americans as American citizens, swings the opposite to these racist stereotypes of African Americans being pathological, right? And so it's within this particular era that these women are advocating for civil rights that looks at cleaning up the image of African Americans. Pretty short-sighted, but hey, this is what they were dealing with, a world that was seemingly expanding rights and then were tightening in the most violent forms, the most violent ways. And so they sought to, it's within this moment that it becomes important to establish norms for behavior and presentation, so that they could fight the image of Black people being lazy, beastly, dishonest. And so that was their reason. And that makes a sort of sense in that era, post-Reconstruction, right? This was not an evil. So the second thing, this was not, in terms of a pro, this was not an evil exercise. The idea stemmed from the betterment of the people. This was considered uplift. It was a collective idea. They are women, church women's groups formed that do this work, that work with the poor as a form of collective work and upliftment. And behind all of this was the idea, in terms of not only fighting the stereotypes that abound about Black people, but the idea of presenting an image of African Americans that were palatable to white supremacists. I say that and I'm not the only one to say this, but the ongoing project of civil rights, at least in the United States, has been to convince people of our humanity. Everything from the moment that we arrive to the resistance movements is to say we are human and we deserve the rights of being human, because white supremacists do not see Black people as human and deserving of equal rights. So this is the heart of kind of all projects. This is the heart of all projects for human and civil rights. But the problem is the ways in which you try to declare that we are human and we should be treated with the dignity of humanity and extended the rights of humanity is that you're never gonna get it from white supremacists. There is not a suit you could wear. There is not a school you could go to. There is not a company that you could have that would convince someone who is a white supremacist to believe that you are human and equal. It's an ongoing project, but it doesn't really work. And you say, okay, what do we do? See, I've been in the classroom for so long. You're like, well, what do we do then? I mean, what can we do? I got a suggestion in my critique of the politics of respectability, but I don't really know the answers. I mean, I'm just throwing things out and I want you to think a certain way. I'm not trying to, wrap it up in a bow and give you a present. I mean, I would have an award, Nobel Peace Prize by now if I knew the answers, but I can tell you the problems that we're running up against with our current strategies. And the strategy of respectability politics and kind of policing the behavior of particularly poor African Americans or other marginalized groups is not gonna get you what you want, which is to be seen as human. So Debbie Downer. And those are the positive things. Those were the positive things about respectability politics, to understand the time in which it was done, and the climate, the racial climate at the time. We see the rise in lynchings. And so at the time, it made sense as a short-term goal towards getting the nation to see Black people as human and equal and deserving of rights of all American citizens. And that's why I want you to extend a little bit of grace for the politics of respectability. Just a little bit, understand the time. When people talk about, say, well, you know what, that was a time. 1890 to 1920, look at it, it was a pendulum shift in terms of the racial climate. And so it makes sense. But that's it. A little bit of grace. Politics of respectability operating in the 2000s does not work, particularly if the foundation of it is to convince white supremacists to see that we're human. That ain't gonna work. Sorry. So let's jump to the cons of respectability politics if I haven't already jumped if I haven't already jumped into it. And this is pretty much a Black feminist critique as well. It's elitist. It's class-based, interracial class conflict, in the sense that we are all, in terms of a community, Black community, but there is power in the folks that get to police, right? And so you knew that. If you read any of the books, particularly, in that era, 1940s, even some Harlem Renaissance stuff, if you follow Du Bois in his writings, James Weldon Johnson, this idea of a talented 10th, which translates to me now as Black exceptionalism and Black excellence. The idea that there are Black people in the community have checked these boxes that are similar or even better than their white counterparts. This idea that you have to work harder to do, this or whatever. The people who succeed in that, who have the degrees, even though I guess I'm in that boat too, but I don't think like that. I didn't come from elite family. But this idea, this talented 10th idea, this idea about Black excellence and kind of Black exceptionalism is, again, a process of saying, see how great we are, see our humanity, we're just like you. And then the opposite side of that, appealing to white supremacists to say that we are as good as you, we talk like you, we went to the same school as you, we have a company just like you do, we are deserving members of society. That in turn also becomes that this notion of a talented 10th has the designation to be controlling and policing other Black people because they didn't hit those marks. And they didn't hit those marks because of immorality or poor behavior, right? That's a problem. And perhaps the worst thing that it does is that it falls into the hands almost of white supremacist ideology, in the sense that, at least when it comes to Black people, that poor people in underground economy, those called scammers and boosters, are somehow totally responsible for their place in life, their location. And this attention to this personal responsibility thing, and you should act right, and you should do right, and you should finish school, and you should get degrees, it takes us away. It takes us far away from what should be the subject in terms of combating white supremacy. It takes us away from systemic and structural racism, right? So boosters and scammers in Young Miami's neighborhood are the people who make money because they are locked out of other economic opportunities. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what part of society keeps people, what are the rules and regulations and the policies that keep people in their cycle of poverty. We should never get away from that. We should be able to say white supremacy builds the foundation of American institutions, and to tackle civil rights, we must rewrite and transform those institutions. Did I say anything about individuals? Do I say that wearing a bonnet is going to be the death of you? I don't like bonnets, but it's just because of my age. It's my age more than anything. But yeah, I mean, it takes us away. Ultimately, clutching your pearls at a particular young Black artist who is articulating her experiences to an audience that, reflects and understands her experiences, denouncing her, again, is misogynOIR, but takes away from really understanding the heart that these young people in these communities that have been under invested in and underserved have to find opportunities. I know some of you are saying, oh, why are you making them a victim? We are all the victims. We are all the victims of white supremacy. I'm saying you gotta stay back at the core, right? Let's stay at the core. Why are these activities happening? There's no, innate inferiority or criminality. It's the conditions, and the conditions are made because of the structural racism. Let's stay on task, people. I'm sorry, that snapping was me. Give me a minute. I'm popping off my thing because I'm almost finished. I don't know how long I've been going. It doesn't tell me. So, where we've gone so far, I have critiqued the critics. Laying at the foundation of my critique of the critics is misogynioir and the politics of respectability, going to the roots of the term, understanding it at the time within the context of 1890 and 1920, how that might be a strategy that was available to them, but that it's ultimately a failing strategy because what we want to do is to show our humanity against people and institutions who refuse to recognize it. And that we need to demand it, to take it, and to tackle the institutions, not the poor Black people who are just the recipients of neglect, institutional neglect, and being underserved in these communities and creating opportunities for themselves. Now, I want to end with my little papers. I would be remiss if I'm talking about structural inequality and white supremacy and scammers and boosters. I don't know what a go-yard bag is, y'all. You have to remember, I'm over 50, slightly over 50. So if you want to tell me what a go-yard bag is, I know I could Google it, but I'd rather hear from you. That's the only part I don't understand. I understand boosters. I may or may not have purchased things from boosters. I cannot recall at this moment. But I don't know what go-yard bag means. So hit me up. But I want to end this towards looking at, again, zooming out from Young Miami in her song to looking at the true boosters and the true scammers that we should be focusing on, and just dance to that bop, just dance to it. Now, the same time that this was moving, spin that was moving up the charts, there were a series of articles coming out of the New York Times that was investigating how the Trump family had profited in this administration for the first 2 years. Has it only been 2 years? 1.5 years? Oof, Lord, it feels like dog years. Anyway, the New York Times has been on it with, and not just New York Times, I also love ProPublica as well. And I'll put the link to ProPublica. I like their work. Much less funded. Excuse me, but also doing incredible investigative work. But the New York Times, because it's the New York Times, has written a series of articles as lately as the last 2 weeks about the wealth that has been created by the corruption within this current administration, starting with 47 himself, down to his family, and then to people, members of his cabinet. Those are the boosters and the scammers, okay? And you may recall from my last video, which I probably meant to use for this video though, they have stolen more than people in Young Miami's crowd could ever boost. They have stolen more from taxpayers from swindling their own followers than any booster in Miami. I mean, all the boosters in the United States. So back in January, the New York Times had reported that I don't even want to say his name. I'll use it for the algorithm. Trump used his office of presidency to make $1.4 billion. Again, who's the scammer? Since he became president of the United States, he has amassed $1.4 billion strictly from his activities from the Oval Office. 1.4 billion. Then last week, we got even more granular, and they wrote about Trump earning nearly 800 million. Not 2,000 from boosting, 800 million from his family's cryptocurrency firm. 1.4 billion in that 800 million. Who's the scammer and the booster? Last week also was an expose on Don Jr. himself, separate from Daddy Jr. And Junior's investment firm reports 200% in returns. 200% in returns for that firm's investments in AI and defense technology. I'm sorry, I'm looking down here, but I should be looking up here. In defense technology. So the details are, and you can find them for yourselves. I'll put those articles also. They're probably a paywall. But I'm gonna tell you right now. So I know for one that shortly after his father assumed the presidency, Junior bought into a defense company that made drones for warfare. And now he's reporting a 200% return for his firm that builds drones for war. He gave his son a defense contract. Again, who's the scammer and a booster? And also, at the same time all this is happening, while Todd Blanche been nominated for Attorney General, and we do have some people talking about this slush fund where Trump sued the IRS, who he's in charge of, that resulted in a judgment that would put money aside for people who were his allies. And people talk about the possibility of January 6th rioters who would actually get money from this as a means of addressing their, ain't nobody make them do that. And then that other clause that's in there that says that the Trump family would not be audited or prosecuted from here on forever. Who's the boosters and the scammers? And I don't even want to leave it to just them, although we can. But there's also reports even of people in his cabinet. So, the pay for play where Trump has accepted, money, and that his pardons are a result of a change in money. And the irony that they've created a fraud task force headed by J.D. Vance, who is taking helicopters to pick up his son and take him to golf practice. Helicopters in DC to avoid the traffic. Who's the boosters and the scammers? We heard before she left what's her name? The former head of Homeland Security, Miss Christie. She got other problems to worry about right now. But Miss Christie, in her luxury jet travel, the FBI director, Mr. Cash Patel, and his luxury jet travel. Shall I go on? Shall I go on and talk about the real boosters and the scammers? I think you get it. I think you get it. So, my parting message is, let's go deeper. Okay, let's look at the big picture. And let's not spend our time. Let's just dance to that. Spin that issue. Let's just dance, enjoy the beat, and focus our attention, if we want to, on corruption and people getting over on the current people who are in administration. If we want to talk about civil rights and human rights for all, you have to create a strategy that is beyond hoping that white supremacists will finally recognize their humanity. That's not going to happen. There is no cause. They will see dogs going after Black people in suits in Alabama. They will see billy clubs on the Jordan Pettis Bridge. They will have live video of beatings by the police body cams, and they will not be convinced of it. I think most, I don't think our entire country is white supremacist, but appealing on the basis of humanity has not really worked for us. That we have to find some way, and I don't know the answer, but we have to find some way to focus on transforming the systems that white supremacist ideology have created. So that's my little thing. Sit back, enjoy the song. I hope the next time you hear it, you picture in your mind money floating around, like bags of money in the Oval Office. I want in a helicopter. I want you to picture that when you imagine boosters and scammers, and leave Young Miami alone. I mean, I have no skin in this game. I don't, as I say, I know her name. I know City Girls. I could not sing 3 songs. I could not sing anything beyond. I can't. But I do know that's not the issue. I think. Oh, I forgot one more thing. I had a thing for it too. So let's back up just for 1 minute. I'm so sorry, and I'm not editing this, so you just gonna be turned around. Where is that? I'm missing. I have Post-it notes. But I know it in my head. So what I was supposed to tell you between Politics of Respectability and my critique of it and the real scammers and the boosters was this history of tension between the talented 10th or Black political leadership and hip hop. And those of you who are as old as I am can recall Delores Tucker. And if you're youngin' and you now have been, feeling retro, I see people wearing Tupac Shakur shirts. So if you're listening to his music, you may have seen where he goes off on Delores Tucker. And to me, that's a prime example in a long-standing history, particularly in hip hop and censorship by Black political leadership. And Delores Tucker, in her case, Black religious leaders. She was a part of a kind of a large censorship campaign led by white folks, but able and willing participants in terms of Black political and religious leadership against emerging hip hop as it became more popular. And Delores Tucker made an example of Tupac's music, and he went on, as he tends to do, is he writes song about his perceived enemies. And I also want to take you back to Kimberlé Crenshaw. And I've talked about her classic, how she uses the term intersectionality and her classic article about that called Mapping the Margins. While it's basically about the intersectionality of women and domestic violence and all that, there is a subsection on it that deals with the censorship at the time. I believe this article was written in the 90s. But there's a part about this ongoing censorship and the ideas of free speech and Two Live Crew. Now you got to be you got to be really, really retro to remember Two Live Crew and how their music and their lyrics and their highly sexualized lyrics and highly sexualized performances got them banned from band concerts. But they also became the uproar over their music and making them the poster children of what's bad about culture, Black culture, was a large censorship campaign led by, what's her name? Tipper Gore. So Al Gore's wife, I guess he was vice president then. His wife under the Clinton administration was the beacon of censorship in terms of music. And everyone pointed to and made an example of Two Live Crew. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court in terms of their freedom of speech. So there's a long history of people clutching their pearls at hip hop. And again, history will not look fondly on people who saw their mission to censor Black culture that mirrors their experiences as a way to gain liberation and freedom and full citizenship rights. History will not be kind to you. History will be kind to you if you are known to critique the system, not the people and not the culture. That's all I have for you today. So check out the description notes I'll put Higginbotham's book, and I'll put links to the New York Times articles, probably a paywall. But until next time, and let me know what a Go Yard bag is in the comments. Again, subscribe and share. I'll see you later.